Okay, I will call this rowdy meeting to order, please. And we do recognize that we meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE. I would like to make council aware that on January 25th is the expectation of the revelation of the findings at St. Joseph's. So please be aware of that pretty significant event that's slated to occur next week. And we will apprise council of any of the findings or any of the information as we get it next week. So, with respect to the agenda, just a couple of pieces. You've got a late item. It's actually direct from Finance Committee this morning, has some time sensitivity to it, and is really belongs with our capital planning. So I'm going to suggest that we should just actually deal with it as an addendum to capital. So item K2, you can see that come forward there. And we're going to move K1 up ahead of even the delegation. Because apparently we scheduled the chief for a night in which there's a meet the chief at the volunteer fire hall. Is that right? So we'll get you on. I really want to go to that one. Yeah. So we'll go to you right away. And our retirement presentation is not occurring tonight. So with those changes, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Councillor Paul so moved. Councillor Elliott second. Okay, what? That's the fire hall. Yes. Yeah, we're going to add that just at capital. Okay. So with that, we have the motion to adopt the agenda, approve the agenda. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And then with respect to the regular minutes of December 7th, can I have a motion to adopt? Councillor Goulet, so moved. Councillor Vick, second. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, we're going to turn it over and go straight to K1 then, to the administration report from our fire chief. It's all yours.
Yeah, just a brief overview on our wildfire deployment for 2021. So obviously, Cornell Fire Department was involved with the BC wildfires. We spent a total of 39 days in the field, and July the 8th, we were, once we got approval from our city manager and requested from the fire commissioner's office, we were deployed on July the 8th to the 15th for the Burns Lake fire. And after 8 days there, we were released. And then from the 24th of July all the way till August 23rd, we were involved with the fires in the Cache Creek area. And those fires involved Lytton, Ashcroft, Savinaw, Cherry Creek, and Logan Lake. And just note, the Quesnel Fire Department was in Logan Lake when the fire actually approached that city. So they were instrumental in helping with that. At this time, if I'm pretty much done with my overview there, if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, any questions on, there's two reports embedded here. So any questions on the wildfire response report? Okay, and so just for clarification for the public who would be interested in this report, on page 46 of 109, the firefighter wages paid out go to the firefighters. The total revenue from the use of our engines, the $301,000, where does that get booked to, and what kinds of things do we use it for?
I'll turn that over
Director
to Director
Bolton.
So sorry, the revenue just goes into firefighter revenue. So what we do, we've done in previous years, is take the excess funds over above what we had our costs and put them into the fire equipment reserve. And then we've already got that scheduled to be used for some of our equipment in the capital budget.
Great. And I think the first year we got a fairly large sum, I think 2017 or whatever it was, we were able to use that to actually support wildfire response equipment so that when our teams went out, they were better equipped to be out there. So that's the kinds of things that we use that revenue for. It's not just found money that we throw into general revenue or anything like that. So, okay. Thank you. Any further questions on the wildfire report? Okay, on to the second one.
All right, so this is the incident report for 2021. So the Cornell Fire Department was dispatched to 642 calls in 2021. So this is the largest number ever recorded. In 2020, we were dispatched to 443 calls. So that's 199 extra calls in 2021. They were primarily, the increase is obviously due to more medical aids, lift assist requested by BC Ambulance, burning complaints, items fire, and we had a significant increase in serious motor vehicle accidents and small wildland fires around Quesnel. And I did attach the breakdown there. You can see the numbers.
Okay,
Any questions?
Yeah, questions or comments for the fire chief? Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, just a big thank you, Ron, to you and your whole team for what you do and keeping us all safe. It's greatly appreciated, and I'm sorry those numbers are so high. That's an incredible increase in a couple of years. But thanks so much for everything.
You bet. Thank you.
Councillor Vic?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief, as well. I guess the question I have is the preponderance of that overage is the medical calls. Is that because of challenges in the ambulatory I guess, calls or lack of ability to respond?
Sorry. Well, that just reflects on the BC ambulance calls. Obviously, their call volume is higher than ours, obviously. We just provide the backup for BC ambulance. So they have a one full-time car on staff. If that car is out and busy, then what we do is we respond. We cannot transport. We only stabilize the patient until BC ambulance can respond. So sometimes that wait can be 30, 40, even 60 minutes. So, and obviously their call volume, if we get a higher call volume. Obviously last year we've seen a, influx of medical calls, and that can be, various calls, but, and that's obviously only because they're backed up.
So you think it's because of the call volume at writ large was increased? Is that the reason why they leaned on us?
For sure. Yep, definitely.
Councillor Runge? Boy, I tell you, I want to play poker with you, Councillor Runge, because there was no physical movement there. It was just that little bit of a look, eh? I don't think he's got a good bluff face.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Good call. Actually, I was going to have the same question as Councillor Rick there. Thanks, Chief. My question, though, with regards to the ambulatory calls, has there been some discussion with, with the BC ambulance service, or is that? I'm not sure if that's in your purview or in our purview, but we do want to note this summer so that it actually goes up the chain, because if we're having too few ambulances in town and it's then coming to us, then that also becomes an issue. So I guess I don't know how to phrase that properly.
Yeah, and we'll let the fire chief respond to it, but it is more of a political question and policy question.
It is, and I think, the unit chief for Quesnel will be better to answer that question. But basically, yes, we did get an increase in full-time paramedics in Quesnel, but obviously that, we have one full-time car now, and that's the Alpha car. But obviously, we need more full-time paramedics to take up that extra medical calls. And until that happens, that we are the responding unit, obviously, or agency.
Yeah, and I'm going to suggest that this report on a couple of items be taken to Public Safety and Policing Committee for more deliberation around that. The adjunct support of our fire department to the ambulance service has been a bit of a bone of contention for quite some time, because we end up deploying resources that are meant to protect properties in our community to back up a service that protects and supports lives, if you will, to make it that simple. So if our fire department is responding to the support of an individual who's injured because the ambulance it can potentially compromise us in a situation where we have to do our primary duty, which is responding to property. So that's always been a bit of a tension for us. We've sort of had ongoing over the years some conversations around that. And there's a couple of things here that I think it's worth the Public Safety Committee digging into a little bit, and that is the increase in the medical dispatch calls and what that means with respect to the resourcing of the ambulance, because we've been asked to weigh in on that ambulance resourcing, and we've been loath to, because that's more of a provincial issue. But if it directly impacts a service that we tax people for and provide, then I think that that's a wedge for us to have that conversation. And then the other, and it's a question for you, Chief, with respect to financial implications, it says increased calls and medical equipment inflation were the primary reason for extra costs which impacted the fire department operating budget. Maybe you could just give an explanation of what's the nature of those costs that we are incurring as a result of medical response.
Well, unfortunately, with the pandemic, obviously medical supplies increased drastically. We wear the N95 masks, and the cost of those quadrupled, right? Gloves, everything went up. Anything to do with medical supplies, definitely, because it was price and demand, right? So, so they just increased. So that increased obviously our operating budget too. So.
And do you use things like oxygen and your first aid materials, et cetera?
We do, and most of the time, for 95% of the time, we are reimbursed by BC Ambulance. What we use on scene, they will reimburse us. But things like masks and gloves, obviously, we supply our own. So
good. Thanks for that clarification. But I do think it should become an agenda item. I think I've got Councillor Rudenberg and then Councillor Paul.
And thank you for that, but it was in regards to the cost of what's covered. Sorry, it was in regards to the cost and what is covered by BC Ambulance and what we have to take on. So that was answered. Thank you.
Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question on, in view of the vaccine mandates, is our volunteer complement still okay?
Oh, yes. Actually, all of our volunteers are out fully vaccinated.
Perfect. Thank you.
And just a corollary to that is my final comment. How are we doing? I see you've got a report here on the beginning of the recruit training for 5 new volunteer members.
Yep.
How are we doing in terms of our overall complement?
Good. Right now we're sitting at 37. That includes the 4 career staff. And next Tuesday we start our 10-1 program, our professional firefighting program, with approximately 8 of our volunteers. And we're taking on 5 new volunteers, and that'll be 5 months of training, and then they'll be able to get in their regular roster.
Great. Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Fire Chief. You are free to go get accolades or beefs and bouquets or whatever it is.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go back in order for our agenda then and ask the Conservation Officer to come on up. And your presentation is queued up and sitting in front of us here. So, and Blake, I had a brief comment with Blake there that we've all had access to this, and so he's free to just hit highlights so that we can get into a dialogue. Okay.
Right on. So, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Blake Knibbs. I'm a Wildlife Safety Response Officer with the BC Conservation Officer Service. So part of my background training is I'm trained in conflict, wildlife reduction, attractant management, predator attack assessment, and much more. So kind of what the goal of today is to educate you guys on the conflict issues that have been happening in Quesnel. This year there is a significant amount of conflict, and just kind of ways to reduce that, because most people in the town have been affected one way or another. So this is a chart that I made through our reporting site. You can see that the calls in most months are up significantly from years past. A lot of that is due to mismanaged attractants. So while the total number of calls is reduced, we did have a lot more reduction efforts put in this year. So that was primarily my role as a seasonal officer. And through WildSafe BC, they also contributed a significant amount. And this is throughout the entire caribou. So it's not just Quesnel that's increasing, it's the caribou as a whole. So it's not just the city that we're working with, we're trying to work with everybody in the caribou. Yeah, so just a couple of breakdowns here. We had 360 calls regarding human-wildlife conflict. So this was anything ranging from sightings, bears accessing garbage, fruit trees, and kind of everything between, pet foods. The primary call that we received was bears getting into garbage. Again, this was down slightly from the 436 calls, but there was not the same amount of attractant management reduction that was put in by the CO service. So this visual, you can see that it's south end of Quesnel, which again, not all of this is the city's jurisdiction. But you can see there's a significant amount of bear conflict, and this is not just every single bear that was put in there. This is a multiple occurrence. Same with the west side of Cornell. So this is available through the WildSafe reporting line. So some of the education that's being provided, the CO service alone, just myself, I've interacted with 1,400 people just through attending markets and other various events. This does not include going door to door through my daily activities. WildSafe has interacted with more than 2,200 people. This is through going door to door. This is through education through schools, farmers markets, and different various events. So what WildSafe is doing is they're going door to door. They're looking around the community, looking for ways to go and reduce the conflict. There's been many instances with people having very close conflicts with bears in Quesnel this year. That's increased from last year with close conflicts. So they also have a bin tagging program, where it's a removable sticker that they put onto bins that have been put out earlier, as per the bylaw for that. The CO service hasn't developed that yet, but we are in the works of developing that sticker. So education in Quesnel, it is the easiest solution to implement. It's cost effective, and it works when it's paired with attractive management techniques. The other primary reason for having education is that it reduces the workload on the CO service in regards that we can go and then be ensuring that the resources outside of the community, which are also drawing people to the town, are being managed appropriately. The other reason for education is it increases public safety. So ensuring that people don't have attractants out, make sure that the bears aren't going to be coming in as frequently. Bears do transit through the area quite often. They do follow the Fraser River. We're trying to make sure that bears are not being in the town as much as we can. So as you saw, there is a brief overview of the photos of the bears in Quesnel. Some of the primary areas were the fruit trees, household garbage and waste, the fringe areas, so like along the parks. That's a common area for bears to reside, and barbecues as well were common. There's a Bearsmart program. So there's a 6-step program, which you guys can see. And essentially what the Bearsmart program does is it overall reduces the amount of bear conflict that's in the town. And there is a case study later on in the presentation. So the end goal for Quesnel, from the CO services standpoint, is to make sure that Quesnel is being bear smart. We want to reduce the amount of bear conflict in the town. After initial cost, there will be less expenditures for Quesnel after paying workers to go and clean up garbage from, especially on the west side behind Abbott Heights. That was an area that was definitely picked up a lot by city workers. We were in there quite regularly this summer trying to reduce the conflict. We educated many, many people in there. So education is an effective interim solution. By having locking bins to go and make sure that the garbage isn't being accessed by the bears is definitely the way that we want to go. I understand that having the bins being implemented right away is going to be a bit of a challenge given COVID and the supply shortages. For that reason, it's definitely important to have the education. And also with test trial, retrofitting the bins that are already in place to go and reduce costs for having a locking bin. Bring in a whole new fleet of locking bins after the bins were purchased not too long ago, from my understanding, would be a large cost. So being able to find a retrofit solution, testing it first in a smaller area, and then going and looking at the results from that would be beneficial for sure. Yeah, so we have a proposed test trial. So the area that we selected is in the west side. It's in the Abbott Heights area. So I've got a map on the next slide here. This is the proposed locking mechanism. So how it works is it gets bolted into one side of the garbage bin. There's a little clip, and that's bolted onto the other side. And they just put that over the top of the bin, and it goes like that. So then the bear can't open the lid because it's shut. Again, this is only one potential locking mechanism that was drafted up at Babcon Industries up on 2 Mile Flat. So it's local in town here. The cost is approximately $31 per unit. Again, that's just one. There's many other kinds of retrofit locks. So that's the proposed test area. That was some of the highest conflict areas we had in Quesnel. So it would affect people in that area. The lock takes about 5 seconds to open it, put the bag in, and close it. It's not a major inconvenience for people. After talking with people in the area, they were very supportive of having a locking mechanism. I don't have any numbers for you, but we could definitely arrange for that to happen. It would also make sure that the people who have the locks would have to take it off for garbage pickup, because otherwise it just wouldn't be feasible for the truck operators to be taking the locks off all the time. Yeah, so for the test trial, it would require approximately 160 locking mechanisms. That's just from the bins that I counted. I'm not sure what the exact number of bins are in that area. It cost about 5 minutes of city time to put the lock mechanisms on, unless you got the constituents to put the locks on themselves. So some of the benefits of that locking mechanism, you'd have reduced conflict. You would be able to have more public safety in that area. I'm sure that you guys saw there is a news article of a lady getting licked by a bear. That was in this test trial area. So we're definitely trying to reduce conflict right there. And so this is a study with Golden. That's where I worked prior to being in Quesnel. They had a locking bin implementation, so it was they got brand new bins, and so that the next slide here. So essentially, the calls were extremely high in 2016, and you can see a very, very obvious decrease in and this is Golden as a whole. So the town site itself was even less, but the district itself, all the bear calls were going down significantly. So if this was to be brought into Quesnel, the CEO service would be able to better do their duties throughout the entirety of their district, which covers from Hickson down to McLeese Lake as far as the east goes west. So we have a very large area to cover, and if we can reduce the amount of bear conflict in town, we increase public safety. And those are some of my sources. And do you guys have any questions for me?
Perfect. Thank you. Questions, comments from the council?
Thank you, Blake. Great presentation. I think education is the perfect way to go. Just a question. With regards to the conflicts, I know that sightings were part of those conflicts.
Yes.
Do we have a percentage of how many of these conflicts that you alluded to before were just sightings?
I can get that for you. I don't have those numbers at this moment.
Okay, thank you. No, you don't have to get them for. I just was curious about it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Very informative. I'm just curious, a couple of things. Do you tag bears at all? Like, do we know how many are the same bears in the same area? Is there one that's just wreaking havoc, that kind of thing?
So the issue with bears or conflict wildlife, I should say, is that once they learn a behavior, they never unlearn it. So once a bear gets into garbage, you could relocate it 350 kilometers away. It can be back in 3.5 weeks. So it's unfortunately, when bears do get into garbage, we do have to euthanize them the majority of the time. If we do end up relocating, which is not very often, yes, we do tag bears.
Okay, that does lead me directly into my next question. And I don't really want to dwell on the answer too much, but I mean, it would put it into focus for people. How many bears were put down?
In Cornell, there's 22 this year.
22. And how many were relocated?
I don't have those numbers, but if I was to estimate, I would say 3.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments by council? Just one from me. With respect to the engagement, bears engaging with garbage, one of the issues that we addressed last year through incremental support for Bylaw is people putting their garbage out early. so that it's in an open space on the street, more readily available than maybe where they would have it either close to their house or in a shed or something like that. Now, you know, if I read this correctly, if they're putting their garbage out, you know, the night before or whatever, they're most likely going to unlock it. So is there any way that we have the ability to explicate from the data how many circumstances were people putting their garbage out early, because then the locking mechanism would not have effect?
Yeah, so when the seal service is able to determine that the garbage was put out beforehand, which in that area actually was not very common. So the vast majority of the test trial area, it was the bins being broken into at the house site. So, you know, there's a lot of people with ratchet straps in that area. They do work, but that's not a proper solution.
Yeah.
So having a permanent solution with that being metal, because there is fabric straps that you can use, the weather that we have in the Caribou, that's going to last.
Okay, and that's a good discrimination for us in terms of picking a test area, is if most of the interactions are when it's where the garbage would sit regularly and not out. And I think with all of these things, just as with any of the issues we've got, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach. So continue to work with our bylaw on ticketing individuals and educating them to not put their garbage out early, and then something like this. So you know, my suggestion would be that the suggestion here go to, I guess it would be Finance Committee more than anything, right? Because it's basically a financial implication for us to work with you on this and figure out what to do. So, okay. Councillor Vic.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm just, not to get in the weeds on your test area, but I've done the math. It's about $4,700. That's what the ask is here, or for the test. Is there a way to concentrate that test area to a smaller area and achieve the same kind of data knowledge, and then a more robust rollout after the fact?
Yeah, so there's two streets in particular that I recall having a significant amount of conflict in. So that is Blair Street and Abbott Drive, Blair Street and Betcher Street. Those two, there was constantly bears on that area. Granted, the, say, plus or minus 5 roads to either side of those 2 roads, that whole area is getting hit significantly with bear conflict. The only potential downside to reducing the test trial area is that it's just going to push the bears to the next roads. So next year we can go and we can analyze the data for the roads that were adjacent and see what happened with that. Yeah, and again, this is only one locking mechanism. There are other options out there.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate your passion and enthusiasm for this as well. And so our chair of our Finance Committee will make sure it's an agenda item for us to take a look at this. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Okay, moving on with our agenda then, into committee reports. Executive Committee, Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this meeting felt like it was an age ago, but as I read through it, again, to refresh memory, we had some pretty interesting stuff to talk about, first of which we were regaled on the data from our recent survey on Let's Connect regarding the Laborde Park situation. So quickly, the spray park got lots of feedback. Generally speaking, people would like improved spray features. Some shade would be nice. That was common. And we also had some comments about slippery deck, and I know Public Works has kindly agreed to take a look at that, so we appreciate that. The Friendship Stage, a lot of comments on just needing to be modernized in various ways. Regarding connectivity in the trails in the park, accessibility and mobility improvements for strollers and wheelchairs were top priority. And we even have some ideas tentatively to look at some trail or connectivity around the cemetery. So there's already some ideas percolating on how we can address that. And then obviously the Rotary Ballpark got a tremendous amount of feedback. Overwhelmingly from respondents, they did not want the Rotary Ballpark moved. The city is working on a process to better understand the needs of the users of that ball field and how that might impact their service. So obviously West Fraser Timber Park would have to be looked at for additions should we do anything with Rotary Ballpark. So that sort of engagement will be happening in the future. Mayor Simpson updated ECOM regarding trail development engagement in the community, specifically with the Gold Rush Cycling Club. And as maintenance is undertaken and future trail projects are undertaken, we will continue to work with that club. And just as we reflected on the fact that there are a lot of skill levels using those trails, and it's important that as we develop new trails into the future, we bear that in mind, that there are novice riders, expert riders, and other user groups entirely using our trail network. So we must bear that in mind. Then we turn to the Tourism Relief Fund. We discussed the potential targets for a Tourism Relief Fund grant through Western Diversification. And we already have some conceptual work done on augmented trail reality project. And it was determined to be a good fit based on those parameters of the grant. And the fact that we've already done some work on that project, it would certainly be expedited quicker. Then we discussed Minerals North hosting. And there may be a potential to host that event in 2023. We obviously put a tremendous amount of work into that file for 2020, which was obviously canceled because of COVID. So because we've done some legwork on the file already, it would make sense that we'd be well positioned to host that event in the future. There's still lots to be discussed on this, and there's still more information coming on this file. So we'll keep council appraised of that. Even this week, there was some more information on locations for the future. So we'll definitely keep council appraised of where that conversation goes. And then lastly, we discussed the Municipal and Regional District Tax, or known as the MRDT, and the Caribou Chilcotin Coast Tourism Association. So we recently received a letter from hoteliers who are opposed to the MRDT. And with this opposition, it's clear that we will not meet the threshold for the approval process. And with that not proceeding, we need to decide what we're going to do next. So the city has had long-standing concerns regarding the lack of representation of Cornell by the Triple CTA, and we need to have renewed dialogue with that organization so we can address those issues. Within that dialogue, it makes sense that we discuss the possibility of the Triple CTA having a go at establishing an MRDT, since they're in that field, in that domain. Staff have been asked to set up a meeting with the Triple CTA and executives so we can sort of re-engage on these files and on these topics. And again, executive will report back to council.
Okay, questions or comments on executive report? Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to Councillor Vic. Excuse me, I'm wondering if, in view of the fact that the local hoteliers are not in favor of a municipally implemented MRDT, is there any sense as to whether they would be more amenable to a regional MRDT through the Triple CTA?
I suppose it's possible, because the Triple CTA is more of has a regional approach to how they would represent us, and the mayor, I'm sure, can add to this. I think some of the concern was some of these hotels are franchises of a national nature, and they would prefer to be part of an organization or a taxation scheme that represented the region. So I don't know the exact answer, but perhaps they would be more amenable.
Yeah, but the short answer is no. There's one franchise, that's the Sandman, and the Sandman has a corporate position that they would only participate in a regional tax. But there's an inherent conflict in their position that we've pointed out to them multiple times, and that is that the chair of the triple CTA's MRDT, or Municipal Regional District Tax, is also the named manager of the Sandman locally. So there's a bit of a conflict there, and again, who's the arbiter? If they're in on the tax, which they are in a number of locations, who should be the arbiter of where that tax money goes to and how it's managed? It shouldn't be a franchise, it should be the community. But what we've got, and what the real issue is, has nothing to do with who gets the tax. We have a very clear split in our community. We have owner-operator hotels that are heavily invested in, some of our premier hotels, who have signed on to the Municipal Regional District Hotel Tax for the municipality to do that, who have rebuffed a regional tax. So they've said absolutely no to regional tax. If they're going to do it, they want it done municipally. And then we have a group of hoteliers who are owned by foreign individuals, who are not franchises or anything of that kind, who are just flat out opposed to a tax being imposed. Even though we've explained to them multiple times, this is not a tax on them, it's not a tax on their hotel, it has nothing to do with taxation per se, it's called a tax. All it is an incremental fee on the people who rent hotel rooms, and we're the only community in the entire region that doesn't have it. So it makes no sense that we wouldn't be collecting those dollars to be then able to market. And I think the real issue is that Quesnel has the ability to have a whole lot of hotels make very good business from non-tourism related business. So it's mostly contractors, business people coming in, West Fraser's head office. So they really don't see the direct link to tourism marketing that we would be enabled to do through the MRDT. So there's a disconnect there. And that's why we've said, when I was down in Victoria, to the tourism minister, there's enough of an uptick on this particular taxation, this incremental, fee on rooms. They should just impose it provincially and then give the communities that ability, instead of this nonsense of, who's your owners and, going after regional or local or whatever. They should just actually impose the tax, give us the dollars, and then we can do what's right for our community. And so that's kind of where our lobby is. But the letter that we got was predominantly, was not from any of our owner-operator or local owner-operator hotels. It was from hotels that are predominantly owned by foreign investors. So that's where the real issue is. Okay. Other questions or comments on the report? Just a quick, I do want to comment on the Laborde Park info, because it was one of our first, I think we did it in conjunction with accessory dwellings, but it was our first kind of community engagement using our new platform. And it was quite interesting to look at the documentation, because it's really that ongoing question of how do you get informed dialogue with the public. So as an example, with respect to the stage, there was a kind of a tension in the feedback we got, where it was, well, the stage isn't used very much, so don't invest in it, with, well, the stage should be used a lot more. And the reality is, and I just had a meeting with some of the members of our arts community today, it's because the stage isn't plug and play, because it's not modern, because you can't do presentations on it, because you have to hire all those massive just went out of my head. Thank you. The massive sound system from Prince George, that it's really awkward to use. And if you try and use it just as a little standalone with a little speaker and a mic, the stage eats all that sound and it doesn't really work. So we know from our perspective that part of the logic around an investment in the Friendship stage is to modernize it, make it plug and play, and then the community who want to see it used more would then see it used more, but you have to make the investment. And it was similar to the the spray park, where you could see a clear division among the, the individuals who have kids that use the spray park, who want to see it invested and expanded, and then people who don't have kids who don't see why you would invest in it. So feedback from the public always has to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, that it is part of our decision process. It doesn't determine what we're going to do, but informs what we're going to do. And this exercise was a really good case in point. And we now have 2 that we're going out with on our neighborhood planning exercises that, again, it'll be the same. It'll really depend on the level to which people inform themselves before they give us feedback as to how valuable that feedback will be. But the other piece I want to say on that is we are looking at doing some advanced planning now. We're taking a look at the different parts of this. So with respect to the connectivity trails, getting something ready and worked up so that and when they open up, funding for more trails, which they've done in the past through the Ministry of Transportation, we have an answer to that. The Friendship Stage modernization, we need an options appraisal of that. What is the technology? What can we do? And again, get grant ready. So for all of these things, we'll start to do some work on getting grant ready projects and then start shopping it around for grants. Okay? Anything else? Okay, thank you, Councillor Vic. On to Councillor Elliott. And Councillor Elliott, since you've got 2 short ones, why don't we just do the 2 together, and then we'll go to bylaw, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And they are kind of redundant. I mean, the first one's from December 13th, and this is for the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee. Topics discussed, the capital budget report. The committee reviewed the updated capital plan, and the committee reduced the crosswalk program back to 1 regular crosswalk per year, and that's going to be where we talked about it, the South Quesnel BIA area. A lot of this is going to be discussed tonight, so I'm just going to touch on it quickly. The operating budget pressures, as you've looked at our report tonight, the RCMP retroactive wages owed is certainly a concern and something that we will be talking about tonight. Other challenges include the general inflation this year and the use of the surplus and COVID funds to reduce taxation in 2021. It was a great idea, absolutely needed at the time, but whenever you do something like that to relieve the pressures on the budget, it is going to come back. So it is coming back tonight for us to discuss.
Sorry, just for clarification, tonight's capital, it'll be the next council meeting. It's just that we had our meeting today, so in our heads for tonight, but it's not.
They're all there, there's the RCMP. The COVID funds, we reviewed the COVID funds allocation and some potential uses for the funds in the budget 2022. Budget consultation, the committee reviewed the budget survey and made some suggested changes to the survey that we'll be looking at again. And then there was a recommendation, but that will be coming up later. I can read it out if you'd like, Mr. Mayor, or just...
Yeah, no, it's an Addenda item. Oh, no, this one... Yeah, this one we do have to deal with because Councillor Rudenberg raised this for us. So, and I wonder, Councillor Rudenberg, maybe you could give us a little bit of a background context for the resolution, and then the committee chair can advance the resolution then. Okay. So, Councillor Rudenberg, go ahead. Thank
you for that. So, throughout the past little while, we know that there's been a change in the costs of what the RCMP what they're asking for. And so FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, has requested the feds to cover 100% of the cost of the retro wages that are being asked for through their new contract. And so this has been an ongoing ask probably since the announcement that the retro wages were going to be incurred on communities. What happened late last year, a group of larger urban community mayors wrote a letter to the feds asking for 50% of the cost to be covered. given the fact that they were contacted and said, listen, here's where FCM is, here's what the ask is, they still felt it was prudent to write this letter to ask for only 50%. And so basically they were hanging out a lot of other communities of smaller sizes to go, okay, so then we'd end up paying 50% of it. There's a lot of banter around why they ended up with only a 50% ask. So UBCM has also supported FCM's request for the 100% cover of the cost of the retro wages. And so communities throughout BC have been sending their own support letters to the feds and to FCM, just letting them know that they do support their ask of the feds for the 100% coverage of the retro wages.
And maybe, Director Bowen, maybe you can explain sort of, we've been saving for those retro wages without actually being able to get any intelligence as to what they were. Now we're getting a number.
To be fair, each year we got a letter from the RCMP with an estimate of what they expected the accrued wages to be, so that's what I accrued each year, but it turns out when they negotiated and finalized their contract, it was substantially more than what we'd been accruing.
Yeah, and over that same period of time, our overall RCMP costs have been escalating as well, and then we've added personnel too.
For sure, yeah.
So it's not as if we've been declining those costs. So
Yeah.
it eludes me as to why, and I think it's the sort of this urban mayors is 13 mayors or something, right? But take a look at Prince George, for example. I would argue Prince George is in pretty significant financial trouble. Why they would give away 50% of a potential backstopping from the RCMP, I don't understand that logic.
And so I do believe that they've actually written a letter of support. So they've basically kind of done a little bit of a backpedal once council realized what was going on. Yes.
Okay,
We
so
won't
fair
talk about
enough.
the urban mayors.
So that's the context, is to support the UBCM now, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and saying, look, the federal government should cover this one-time cost. That wouldn't get us off the hook, the one-time back charge. Wouldn't get us off the hook in terms of increasing RCMP costs. It would just offset costs that we're accruing year over year anyway. So with that in mind, that's the backdrop for the resolution, and so Councillor Elliott can advance the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the resolution that the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee recommends to Council support the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, request for the federal government to cover 100% of the cost of the retro wages owed to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And I'd move that.
Seconded for that motion, Councillor Vic. Councillor Runge. Any further questions or comments on this? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And could I ask Councillor Rittenberg, are you able to work with staff and just get something, if there's letters already going, if a copy of one of those could be given to staff, we can quickly get it out?
I'll see if I can find one. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then just your second report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is from January 10th. Assessment updates. The committee reviewed the preliminary assessments received from BC Assessment. Residential properties have increased 28.6% on average in the city, and commercial properties have increased 7%. With the operating budget, personnel changes for budget 2022 were discussed and will be addressed on the agenda under staff reports. The discussions from this meeting will be incorporated into the full operating budget document that will come to the next FSAC meeting. We did have one request, and the committee reviewed a request from Yell for entrepreneurship support for high school students. The committee did feel that this did not fit the city's normal type of funding, since it was more education-oriented, and recommended that the information be forwarded to the BIAs and the Chamber to see if they would be interested in support of the program. There were no recommendations at this point, so I just moved that report as information.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the report? Councillor Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, this goes to both of the reports from Councillor Elliott, and I know that we're talking about capital budget tonight, but the subject of operating budget came up in both reports, and it's more specific in the first report, wherein on page 41 of 109, it's mentioned that there's a partial list of the challenges that we're facing. and one is obviously the RCMP costs, but there's also COVID funds that are reduced, loss of industrial taxation, inflation, tax shifting, and the TOLCO closure. So my question is, does the FSAC committee have any idea at this point, say to the closest 5% of where we might land in terms of an operating budget increase?
So again, Councillor Paul, all council members were invited to today's Finance Committee meeting where they could actually understand that. We're working with some raw numbers, and at the next council meeting, that operating budget will be brought forward. But the overarching lift, I believe, is about 6.9% year over year on the operating revenue. But we want to also bring it to council, and the reason I'm just hedging, we want to bring it to council where things like this retro is not part of our normal forward budgeting. It's a back charge, if you will. And the same with the loss of industrial assessments and the decision to bring light industrial down. So what we're doing is parsing the numbers out, because the year-over-year comparison is more what's happening on the actual operating budget, not these one-time kind of charges. So it's about 6.9% overall lift, but we'll also have a number that can be used for year-over-year comparison. And that's the comparison for other communities too. So the CRD, for example, has just proposed a 5.2% lift, and they wouldn't have RCMP retro, and they wouldn't have industrial taxes. That's just straight operating. It's going to be a tough year for everybody, and a big chunk of that would be, as you would be well aware, inflation, right, is going to be bigger this year. So, okay. Questions for the Chair Finance or on this report? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Councillor Elliott. And then the final committee report, Councillor Runge.
Thank you. I see why by the 16th people were kind of tired. Our meeting was a lot shorter, I guess sweeter for us. Anyway, so in summary, we looked at the elections, or we actually deferred the elections bylaw review to the meeting on January 27th, so next week. We looked very quickly at the policy and bylaw, the policy servicing bylaw, and we discussed the changes to the development servicing bylaw, reviewed the suggested changes that we talked about with regards to the levels of changes, servicing standards, exempt minimum, highway frontage, and latecomer charge sections of the bylaw. And that is it. There were no recommendations, and our meeting will be next week at 3:15. Everyone is welcome.
Thank you. Questions or comments on policy and bylaw? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if it's if I should be asking this question now. This is regarding the development servicing bylaw, or if I should hold back until we're into the discussion regarding the detail of the bylaw.
Yeah, so the policy committee is only recommending it forward, so the best place to hold that would be when we actually get to that agenda item. Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Councillor Runge. Okay, moving into staff reports. We've already dealt with K1. So K2 will be the capital budget. Director Bolton will go over the capital budget, and then we will add the fire hall renovation project, and Director Norburn will take the lead on that. So Director Bolton, over to you.
Thank you. So this report is to bring forward the capital budget to council for approval. The Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee has reviewed the capital budget in detail a couple meetings. So the proposed capital budget for 2022 is $20,947,390 before final capital carry forwards from 2021. So resurfacing the airport runway is the largest project, which is fully funded by grants at $8.789 million. So the fire hall we will talk about in a minute. So the budget's based on $13.5 million of grants, and actually at FSAC today we also had some minor changes to this budget. You'll see attached are all the various projects, so if you have any questions about any of the various projects you can ask. But the minor changes that came out of FSAC today that I just wanted to mention was to add in $25,000 to the capital budget to heat trace the gutter system at the museum. So we had some challenges with that during this cold snap that we just had, so we just want to add that into, under the buildings for the museum. And then we also had the museum sign in the budget for $15,000, but its total is going to be more closer to $30,000. So we'd like to add in those two adjustments. Both of them would be funded from the Capital Reinvestment Reserve, and both were recommended by FSAC this morning when we met. So again, attached are all the ways we fund the projects, all the projects over the 5 years. So it's just open to any questions that anyone might have.
Yes, I'm going to hold off on the questions on this and go then to Director Norburn because the proposal from the Finance Committee today just impact this, and then we can fold the two together and have the conversation on the overall capital budget. So Director Norburn.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to obtain council approval to allocate up to $2 million from the Capital Reinvestment Reserve to complete the fire hall renovation project for a total budget of up to $4.5 million, including grant funding of approximately $2.5 million. It's actually just a hair over $2.5 million. The current cost estimate for the project is $4,034,783, which is approximately $1.5 million over the grant amount that was received for the project, not including installation of a fire suppression system in the apparatus bay. The difference between the cost estimate and the initial grant application from the budget from the grant application can be attributed to a combination of factors. The grant application budget was submitted with the best information that was available at the time, but may not have considered all of the potential expenses and may have underestimated some. Most notably, the general construction fees and overhead and some of the soft costs. The scope has also been increased a little bit to address objectives that were identified in the grant application, such as improving accessibility and providing better amenities for female firefighters, most notably an accessible vertical platform lift has been added to the scope of work rather than using a combination of an exterior ramp and stairway chairlift as was originally contemplated. Some scope increases have been added that were not included in the grant in order to better meet the needs of the fire department and to enhance the building's facade, such as replacing the overhead bay doors, which are old and have definitely been problematic for the fire department and are too narrow to make it more difficult for the fire department to back in their trucks. They actually have to fold in their mirrors in order to be able to make it in. They're not a normal sized door. And upgrading the building's exterior. So there is a concept drawing of the exterior that's attached. So rather than basically just staining the sort of weather-beaten cedar that exists now, this would actually provide a complete facelift for the building. So there are some costs there that sort of roughly explain, where some of that money is in the current cost estimate. Not included in the cost estimate is the option of providing a fire suppression system or sprinkler system for the apparatus bay. Sprinkler system is not required by code. However, should a fire occur in the apparatus bays, it's possible that the hall's fleet of firefighting equipment could be all lost in one fell swoop. And while insurance can be expected to cover that loss, replacing specialized vehicles like fire trucks, it doesn't happen overnight and would take months. In some cases, it takes over a year to get a fire truck. The hall currently has a sprinkler system in the apparatus bays. However, it was installed years ago and does not meet current standards. It'll need to be removed anyway to facilitate the seismic upgrades that are required, and reusing it isn't feasible. So it's either a question of not having a fire suppression system or installing a new fire suppression system. The cost for this work is not known. The consultants are still working on breaking out that cost, but it's expected that it could be in the range of $250,000. Just speaking of the financial impact, this project will have no impact on the current taxation, with the majority of project funding coming from a $2.5 million grant and the balance of funding, if approved, coming from Capital Reinvestment Reserve. There are sufficient funds in the Capital Reinvestment Reserve to fund this project without negatively impacting the current 5-year capital plan. In proceeding with this project, it'll extend the life of Fire Hall Number 1 for decades, create a more functional space for the fire department, significantly improve accessibility and gender equity in the building, provide much-needed exterior upgrades to a high-profile downtown municipal infrastructure, and address the fire department's needs for considerably less money than the estimated cost of constructing a new facility with no requirement for long-term borrowing. And the recommendation that was made by the Finance Committee this morning and is included in the report is the council approves allocating up to $2 million to be taken from the Capital Reinvestment Reserve to complete the fire hall renovation for a total project budget of up to $4.5 million, including grant funds.
Yeah, so I think we can deal with this. Did you want to comment, Rick? So I think we can deal with this as an independent motion and then fold it into the operating budget. So Councillor Elliott wishes to move the recommendation. Councillor Goulet seconded. I do want to add a couple of things. One for our esteemed Fifth Estate sitting there. This is not a cost overrun, as sometimes these get described. This is the actual project being brought to us. So the application for the grant at $2.5 million was to meet the requirements in the grant. And once we were successful on the $2.5 million for the grant, staff were directed to go and say, okay, what can we do now and what do we need to do now in that building that we actually avoid having to go to referendum in a couple of years to do a full replacement. So this is us actually for the first time seeing the scope of such a project. The second piece that I think council should really think about is that this is a good news story for us as a community on a couple of fronts. Not only are we avoiding going to referendum and borrowing $12 million to replace this, but because of our financing on the capital side, we can actually do this project topped up at full scope without impacting our 5-year capital plan. So our reserves are robust enough to be able to step in and do this, and I think that that's a good news story for council's financial discipline. And then the other reason that it's coming at this time is the time sensitivity of this is we need to get it out the door. Now is the time to get it out for tender, to get going on the project, and to make sure that we actually get this done in a timely manner. So that's kind of why it's coming forward to you to be folded into the capital budget. Okay, so I have Councillor Runge, Councillor Paul. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Runge.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Jeff. Great report. I think we should also add, because with all these upgrades, I actually also see us having a bunch of energy efficiency upgrades in this building also, which are also, well, geared towards our green initiative from the city.
Okay, Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of questions to Director Norburn. In those numbers, is there a contingency allowance?
Absolutely, yeah. The cost consultant is included a contingency,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you, good work. And the second question is that it says in the report that we're looking at an estimated $250,000 for the sprinkler system. Is that number based on installing that sprinkler system in conjunction with the renovation, or if we were to choose to install the sprinkler system maybe a year down the road, would it be substantially more than 250?
That's a question. Well, that $250,000 is a very rough number. That the consultants will give us a more detailed cost. They weren't able to provide that today, so it wasn't included in the scope of work that we had them do the cost consulting on. So we'll get an answer back on that. A big question really is whether or not we have to increase the service into the building in order to accommodate the fire suppression system. If we do, that will add to the cost and definitely would make it so that it's considerably more efficient to do it now during construction. So if you approve this recommendation, we would have sufficient money to do the full project, including the sprinkler system.
I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we have the option before we start putting it out to tender that we're going to either put the sprinkler system in or not.
Yeah, and I think the intention of FSAC and the reason it's coming forward as an up to recommendation, because right now the price point's around 1.5, 1.7 million. So the reason that we're putting an up to 2 million from capital reserve is to accommodate we don't have the fine tuning. So to accommodate it with the intention from FSAC, and I look to the other FSAC members, that it be done as part of the project because it's immediate protection for all of that equipment. So, any other questions or comments on this one? So on the motion, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And just for clarity too, the pricing of this, I meant to mention it initially, is as a bonded project as well. So we've priced bonding the project into it too. So, okay, now back to the the capital budget, given that this would be a substantive change, but again, does not impact what you're seeing on the 5-year projection on the capital budget going forward. It would just be now folded into that. So questions, comments on the capital budget? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you. On page 54 of 109 at the top, under financial implications, it notes that the 2022 capital budget is balanced. And for clarity, I would like to ask, in terms of a percentage on taxation, what is the capital budget projected change from 2021?
So the 2022 capital budget is actually taking no funds from the operating budget. We reduced that to help reduce the operating budget increase. So normally we take 130,000 from taxation.
That's exactly what I thought, but it just didn't seem to be clear for the public.
So and it's a great point, Councillor Paul, because the internal language we use, we get it, but when we say it's balanced, it means, and you'll see on the operating budget, there's a net to the operating budget of 130,000. Is it?
So this year, normally we take 130,000.
Yeah.
This year we're not. When I say it's balanced, I mean when you look at the spreadsheet with all the funding sources equals the costs.
Yes.
So I've covered it all through reserves, grants, et cetera.
Yeah, and then we don't need to tap the operating budget, 130,000 this year for it, okay? Any other questions or comments? Councillor Runge.
Jumping around a little bit, and I can't remember exactly what page it was on, but it was something that I think we've discussed last year, and I know our esteemed leader Byron always wants it, the electric car or the electric vehicle for $50,000. I have no problem with electric vehicles. I actually think we should be going that way as a city, but I think that should come out of fleet replacement, and we shouldn't be putting it out of this budget.
So we can clarify that for you, Director Bolton.
So that is actually in next year's 2023 capital budget. The reason it goes in here is that council has to approve any new vehicles added to the fleet. So this would be a new vehicle. It wouldn't be a replacement vehicle. So this was to add an admin vehicle to the fleet that could be used here for a variety of reasons. But we did push it out. It's in 2023, not this year.
You're going to see another report tonight where there's addition to fleet.
Yep.
So any new vehicles, we have to do a resolution of council, and then it does get rolled into our fleet program.
So I just want to clarify, I guess, that because just coming in 4 years ago, so a new council, when they came in, how would they be tied to the 23, 24, 25? Would they do a vote like we would now and talk about all the things again?
Yeah, so, and it's a great point. So this will be this duly constituted council's last budget. What we did at the end of last term is we gave advice to the incoming council. And because of the change in the election dates, it's not as bad as it used to be because there's a little bit of a luxury of time. When the election was held in November, you weren't sworn in till December. And by then you had to be in your budget pretty substantively. Now they're sworn in November, so there's some time. So all that will happen from this point forward with our 5-year capital plan, our 5-year operating, those kinds of things, will simply be advice to the incoming council, and they will have to actually go into the details and ratify and make it their own.
Thank you, and that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions, Councillor Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you'll indulge me, I've got several questions here that go to the detail of what's being proposed in the capital budget. The first one is on page 57 of 109. And am I reading that right, that the proposed, and I know this is a grant, but is the proposed cost for the residential school commemoration really $500,000?
Go ahead, Director Bolton.
That was the estimate I had at the time, that just placeholder number we put. I know there's been work on that project. I don't know what the current estimate is.
Okay, thank you.
But I believe that you'll see that it's not taxpayer funded at all.
I understand
right?
that.
Yeah.
I mentioned that it's a grant.
So right now, just for clarification, because the question's asked, it's a substantive rebuild of the tiers. That's where the bulk of the cost comes. That if you're going to use those to actually have people access them and sit on them as an amphitheater, it's a pretty substantive change in the engineering specifications and design. And then the other initial, we've asked them to go back to the drawing board. The other initial design was to flatten out the whole plaza so that we dealt with the accessibility issue. There's those 3 steps up. So the engineers working on it flattened it relative to the sidewalk. And we've come up with a suggestion where there's a single point accessible, and you don't have to flatten those steps out, which will reduce the potential cost of it. So it's just a work in progress, and it's just a placeholder at this point.
Okay, thank you. Next one is right over the page, and it's...
Go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, could you please, I don't have the paper copy, I'm working off the computer here, so could you tell me what page of 16 that you're working on? Sorry, thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to page 58 of 109.
And what page of 16?
Pardon me?
So there's another little number, that's number of 16.
Oh, page 4 of 16? Okay. And this is, we're on line 4, total station survey equipment. What is that? Anybody know?
Director Coben.
Yeah, so that's the survey equipment that we use to collect all our data, do all our field work, layout, design work. So basically it's technology that has a lifespan and it's since expired. It's not functioning properly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You can appreciate that while I'm in lockdown, I got nothing to do over there, so I'm really going through this with a fine-tooth comb. Forgive me.
Talking to Dr. Henry about the lockdown.
On page, boy, that's why I've got to wear the glasses. The type is so small. 6 of 16. Public Works paving. It's blank, but I presume it's somewhere else.
Yeah, so that's where we tend to put minor projects that we have none of this year, but the major projects are all up above in road construction. So our annual road rehab paving, we've got $550,000. So it's up on page 5 of 16.
Okay, thank you. And just bear with me here. Page 14 of 16. And this comes up every year, like we're looking at $65,000 each year for technology plan, and video camera update grades $5,000 a year. But the one that really sticks out is to replace photocopiers, printers, and faxes for $20,000 a year, all the way down the line. But aren't photocopiers and printers and faxes really paper reliant? And therefore, I'm hoping that as we move into a paperless environment, that we would see these numbers come down, but it appears that they're not.
Sorry, I find it a bit humorous as you hold a 100-page paper agenda. You know? Yeah. We still use a lot of paper, and the photocopiers only last 5 years, and 20 grand only buys 2 photocopiers.
Thank you for
No,
that.
but I do want to clarify, because it was one of the things when I was first elected mayor that I looked at, because these are not explicit to pieces of equipment that we're purchasing, but they are explicit to our technology plan and how we deal with redundant equipment. And the other piece is we still predominantly communicate with our ratepayers through letters and through various other means of print-based communications as well, so.
And the final one that I have, and I ask this question every year, but you guys really surprised me this year, and this has to do on page 15 of 16, SCADA upgrades. And I was told at the last year's budget meeting that I think it was probably about $28,000 a year now, and inflation has taken it up to 35, but we don't have a number in there for 2022, and I'm wondering why that is.
Yeah, that's, so the 2021 capital budget, we have a substantial carryover that we'll be carrying over, so we've started work on that. We've taken some of our skate upgrades out of that already, so it's just a continuation, so we didn't want to add money for 2022. We already have some money that will carry over from 2021.
Well, thank you for that most comforting information.
Okay, Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try and go in order. So I have a question on page 61, which is page 7. Thank you. So it says for Public Works Parks, we're going to allocate $125K to shade. So is that part of the process of the Laborde Park feedback and whatnot? And this is sort of the tip of the wedge here, or the tip of the spear to get moving on some of those? Is that what that is?
Yeah, so one of the big pieces of feedback we got, and it should make sense to all of us, whether it was the spray park or the playground or whatever, is that desire for more shade. And so Director Thomas has been looking at some options using some of the technology of what's over the gazebo in Laborde Park and integrating into that. And this is just a placeholder based on some estimates to integrate shade. Now, whether the shade gets integrated over the seating areas only, or whether we take Laborde Park and make it a shaded, the playground, and make it a shaded playground, so that, and if you take a look at this year's winter even, potentially you've got a playground there that in warm days doesn't have the snow cover on it because it's shaded, etc. So it's just a placeholder for us to address the issue that was, I would say, probably one of the primary issues coming out of the Laborde Park consultation was shade.
It was huge, yeah.
Yeah.
It made its way onto many aspects of that feedback. And I don't want to put Director Thomas on the spot, but embedded in that shade, obviously that would help with the water spray park. It was mentioned several times about the slipping, which I alluded to in my executive report. Is that going to be in the other side of the budget, or is that even a budgetable item? Or are you still experimenting with that, or?
So just, you're talking about the slippery?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'm bringing a bit of a report to one of the committees there, and I'm trying to get some information on that, on ways to make it better if it's possible at all. But yeah.
That would most likely have operational implications, if anything.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Thank you, that's great. Okay, so the next comment is page 62, which would make that page 8. And I'm just looking, I know we should be focusing on 2022, but I'm looking at 2023 with the methane gas mitigation. And I know Councillor Runge and I had some crazy ideas like 3 years ago about sequestering methane, and we were called crazy for it because maybe not crazy, but we were told there was such little amount of gas there that it wouldn't be practical. If we're investing $100K to mitigate methane, is there not an opportunity to get some help from BC Gas for a project there that would sequester that gas and make it useful for us? If we're putting some money into it, that's why I ask.
Yeah, and sort of encompassed even in our strategic plan is always looking at what happens with methane. Of course, that number there, our methane numbers are obviously rising, and we know that. So there are different sort of methods to whether you're flaring off the methane, whether you're capturing the methane and moving it and using it through the gas company. The fact of the matter, though, is the methane that we create is not enough to capture at this point in time to sell it to a gas company or whatever, like places like Kelowna do and all that. We just don't produce that amount, but we have an amount that we cannot go over, and we're monitored very heavily on it, so it's something that we're sort of planning for the future that it's eventually going to happen.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave that alone. Thanks.
But having said that, because I'm on the CRD Solid Waste Committee, and the CRD Solid Waste Management Plan is what we operate under, and they have a capital item for Gibraltar, for the landfill at Gibraltar for a gas flaring up there. So the same question was asked of their solid waste management team, and the same answer was given, is it's too small an amount, too dirty, the kinds of work that you'd have to do to turn it into a proper fuel, et cetera, that the technology is not there. But I think, Director Thomas, it's fair to say that we are closely monitoring the technology. We're talking to the gas folks. It's not as if we're going to ignore that opportunity. We have to budget based on available technology today.
Yeah, I know a few years ago when we sort of looked at it, there were opportunities for partnership with Terracin or the gas company. I'm not sure who that would be, but okay, so page 65, and that is page 11. And this is pertaining to the elevator. So that is like remove, replace? What is that?
Yeah, I can answer. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, a total like upgrade replacement of that elevator. I'm not sure how old it is, but it's very old and definitely been a problem. I think we've had people that have gotten stuck in the elevator. It's just beyond sort of trying to maintain and needs to be replaced.
Okay. It's just such a huge item. Obviously, I would never wish anyone to get stuck in an elevator, but if there's a refurbishment option rather than a replacement, anyway. Okay, page 66, which is page 12. And I'm just curious, with the recent museum renovation, why are we paying to have the sign worked on more or additionally?
I can field that one. So that was something that was raised with me. Then I went and looked at it. Because of the green roof, you can't see the green sign. And that's what the issue is. And if you actually drove by it with it had snow on the roof, then you can clearly see the sign. And so this is to stop the sign so that the actual sign up on top can be seen by people against the green roof, right? And the thinking is something along the lines of the backing that's over at the gold pan. So if we can mimic that in some form, that would be ideal, but we'll have to see what our options are. Okay?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Runge?
Oh, just adding to that sign, because you're right. When the snow was there, it actually looked haunted. But because it kind of dripped down from the bottom of it. Don't we have an option maybe just to paint it with some light with it at a lot lower cost?
So whatever we do, it has to have a budget allocation to do it, right? So Director Norburn's been working, looking at some options so that it actually can be seen.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the operating or the capital budget? Sorry. Okay, and again, just for clarification, if any of the public are watching this, we have 3 committee members, Finance Committee members, myself, Councillor Elliott as chair, Councillor Goulet. So we've been in the weeds on this multiple times and had ample opportunity to kind of get into the weeds. And Councillor Rudenberg has been able to join us in a number of those conversations as well. So the council members who are digging in tonight are the ones who are effectively seeing the budget for the first time and getting their any issues or questions addressed. So, okay, any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I would ask for a recommendation on the operating budget. Councillor Goulet.
Capital.
Sorry, thank you. You got me right from the very beginning today. It's all your fault. Councillor Goulet.
Can I just have one quick question?
We can still do a question on after the motion is put forward because it's not voted. So Councillor Goulet, so moved. Seconder. Councillor Elliott. Okay, go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, sorry, I just missed that before. With regards to the compressor on page 7 of 16 and the one on 13 of 16, are those, they're both public works equipment, public works building and site. I guess, clarification on that.
Thomas, I guess, or Director Corbin? Who?
Yeah, so the compressor was, since we've moved into the public works site with the design build project, the compressor we're finding is somewhat undersized for the work we're doing in there. So the thought process is we would replace that with a new compressor, and then the existing compressor that's brand new as well, it will go to the airport because the airport the airport shop is in need of a compressor, and it would suit the needs out there fine.
And the mobile compressor under public works equipment in 2023.
Yeah, do you want me to take that, Chris? So the mobile compressor is the one that we use in public works, like for blowing out sprinkler lines and things like that, it's a tow-behind compressor. And the one that we have now is aging out. We're losing power on it, so we're looking to get a new one. That's all. And jackhammers and all that stuff we run off it.
Perfect. So that's that 100 horsepower one? Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Now that really is getting into the weeds. Just saying. Okay. Okay, anything else? Seeing none, we have a motion on the floor to adopt the capital budget. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carried unanimously. And thank you to staff. Every staff member, senior staff member has a piece of this, so very much appreciate all the work that needed to be done, and as with the fire hall as well. Okay, now moving on to Director Turner and the Development Servicing Bylaw.
Thank you, Mayor. As you've stated, this report is to review the proposed development services bylaw. The previous bylaw, this is a complete update and rewrite of the bylaw. The previous bylaw was adopted in 1992. Just to give you some background, the bylaw regulates and sets out the requirements for the provision of works and services that are needed as part of the subdivision, development, or redevelopment of land. Servicing bylaws are intended to regulate and prescribe minimum standards for the dimensions, locations, alignments, and gradients for highways or roads in connection with development. The requirements and specifications for location and construction approval of roads, sidewalks, boulevards, crossings, transit bays, street lights, underground wiring in development, and others. This also, the bylaw also sets out the requirements and specifications for the location and construction of approvals for water distribution, fire hydrants, sewage collection, disposal and drainage, storm drainage collection, and disposal in developments. Just to give you an idea of what this bylaw does, so it's a highly technical, and it's basically the foundation of the engineering standards for development. This bylaw, the requirements for it are different for different areas, and we have prescribed different areas with which the bylaw will specify the standards of which must come to fruition, as I'll describe below. The bylaw provides a framework for the process as well, under which a servicing plan is reviewed and services are installed or secured prior to the approval of a subdivision or issuing a building permit in relation to required servicing. The significant changes to this bylaw. First of all, the level of services. Previously, the level of services were specified by zones. We've moved to where the level of services are now specified by area, and they are within the Appendix A. They are set out via maps and standard listings for different areas of our community. As you know, there's different areas of which certain services are not provided, so that's why it's done this way. It's not necessarily, it was very difficult doing it with the zone requirement. servicing standards, all servicing details used to be specified in the bylaw. So the servicing bylaw used to be a very massive document. Now, and this is a trend that's going on in all communities, servicing standards are being adopted that are industry standards. So they're called the Master Municipal Construction Documents. And these standards are adopted by municipalities, and the services are normally stated that they will apply to a certain standard of that document, and then they will specify where variations will happen from that document. And this is what our bylaw does. It's a big change, and it's a huge improvement for our bylaw. The exemption of minimum highway frontage, these are really two really small little amendments that are happening, but they're significant to users of the, they're in subdivisions, for example. We have had to do exemptions for minimum highway frontage in the past. It takes a bit of a process when it has to come to council. This bylaw just allows the approving officer to make that exemption instead of having it go to council. The latecomer charge has been amended. Again, this is just the latecomer charge that applies to latecomer amounts. Latecomer charges, so you understand, are a charge that is applied if a large service has to be installed by a developer beyond what their needs are. They can come into an agreement with the city called latecomer charge, where other users may buy into the service in the future for up to 10 years. But this is based on a charge, and that charge is applied in interest rate over that 10 years. So that's we're just requiring it go from 2% to prime plus 2% because it was much too low previously. That's the main parts of the bylaw. I'm going to ask if there's any questions.
Councillor Paul.
Thank you. You read me like a book. But you'd be happy to know, very happy to know, that I have far less questions on this bylaw than I did on the capital budget. But the first question to staff, looking at the big picture, does the committee or the staff anticipate that this bylaw, once adopted, will make it easier or less or more difficult, in other words, more or less red tape, and less or more costly for developers and builders, particularly in residential development?
Thank you, and I will definitely say it's going to make it much, much easier for developers. So, again, as I said, adopting the municipal construction standards is an industry standard. That means developers that are looking to put in subdivisions or apartment buildings, etc., can easily refer their professionals to these documents, which they will understand and know how to utilize very easily. In terms of costs, sorry, I'll only answer one of your questions. In terms of costs, this doesn't change the costs of what our standards are. I mean, again, it's engineering standards of which really increases the costs, and unfortunately they are probably going up, but this bylaw is not impacting that.
Thank you.
That's it?
Actually, no, in fact, I found a typo. I've got to tell you about this typo. And you'll be happy that I picked this one up. One moment. On page 74 of 109, item number 1.4, look at the second to the last line. There's obviously something wrong with the way that is worded. When I go over to page 75, where there's a definition of frontage, we all know what frontage is, but maybe there should be some reference in there to the fact that it's not to be confused with taxable frontage, because they're fundamentally different. And finally, I got to go back in time a little bit here to 1982, when I was part of the first graduating class from the Municipal Administration Institute. I think it was at Cornell College. And I remember that when we were studying writing of bylaws, there was a difference between the word power and authority. And I notice in this bylaw that certain people are given, for instance, the Director of Capital Works and Infrastructure is given the power under section such and such, and it goes several times, in fact, many times, the word power comes in. But then when we go over to page, oh, I lost it here. Near the end of the bylaw, oh, here it is on page 87 of 109. The approving officer, building inspector, director of capital works and infrastructure, or their designates are authorized. And that was something that we learned at Maddie back in '82, was that in a bylaw, the word authorized is much more palatable for the person reading the bylaw and being subjected to the bylaw as opposed to somebody that has the power. And when we use the word the power, it's intimidating, and I think that the word authority is much more appropriate there. I'm done.
So again, notwithstanding perceptions, is there a legal discrimination between the use of the word power and the use of the word authority?
I would have to look further into that if council so chooses me to do so prior to adopting the bylaw. I would think it would be a fairly minor difference. However, authority, in my estimation, as Councillor Paul says, it does sort of state is given the authority. So it's like it's delegated down from council, which is the true meaning, I would say. But I couldn't tell you if there was. I would have to seek legal opinion on if it's a significant difference, which I'm guessing, as Councillor Paul stated, there's probably a perception of it being different, but I would think that there's not a real difference.
But bylaw should be about effect, right? And so if the effect does not change, then I think we can proceed. This is long overdue.
Correct.
And I was getting this out the door. I do want to come back because I didn't quite catch the one that I think, if it is an editing error, should be corrected if we're going to proceed with the bylaw tonight. So what was that, Councillor Paul, on page 74? Is that what you're saying?
Are we talking?
That they.
Are we talking about the word authority versus power?
No. You indicated there was a sentence that didn't make sense, or.
Oh, okay.
1.4.
I got to go back and find it now. It's on page 74, and I'll read it to you.
Missing the word "and."
Invalid portion
will be severed and will not affect the validity.
That's what's missing.
Yeah, so when we take this to the readings, we will presume that "and" will be added, okay? Okay, Councillor Runch.
Good eye there, Councillor Paul. And you know what, I would agree with regards to if we're able to change it to authority versus power, I agree with that palatability if it's possible.
And again, I would just caution, that's a rewrite then, because we're going to have to go through and change every place that power is mentioned, et cetera, so which means we wouldn't deal with it tonight. We would defer it until it comes back. That's why I asked the question of intention. Does it affect intention if we just have a difference of, power feels different to me than authority feels different to me, right?
Can I speak? Given that, I'd rather wait for the 1 month and have it done than, or that we pass it with, if the intention is okay, that we could just, if we can't with.
No,
then
you would defer it until that change is made. Okay? So a motion to deferral would be appropriate now, if necessary. Just 1 second. So I want to look to the city manager on this, because again, I think you need to be careful that you're writing bylaws based on how people feel about words. Bylaws should be about action and intent, and if the action and intent is no different, then we can get on with it. To city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do believe that is the approach we should be taking, is maybe I personally don't think there's a difference between the values of those two words. I think it makes sense when the read of it still makes the same sense to the reader of the bylaw, whether you use the word power or authorization. I would suggest we take that under advisement, and in the future, when we're rewriting bylaws, we, at some point get a little bit of have a discussion on that. But from the sake of let's proceed with this, I would suggest that we proceed as it is in front of you with the addition of that one word "and." I think if any one of us could go through a longish bylaw like we have, we could find words where we say there's a missing word, or there's something, are you sure about that word versus that word? And at that point in time, the bylaw writing process becomes endless, and the iterations of it can keep going and going. So I think we just need to push ahead, Mr. Mayor. At least in my own opinion, and I guess I'm open to discussion on it, I don't think there's a difference between the meanings of those words. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could, this has been something that we've had to tidy up for quite some time. So according to the definition of authority, authority is the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. And it's a person or organization having political or administrative power and control. So I don't know what you gain by wasting a month to change power and authority. Director Turner.
One additional item, sorry, I was messing up with my mic there, sorry. The one additional item is that when we are taught to review and write bylaws now, we are often asked to use common language instead of, overly being critical of specific legal terms. So that is one other item to consider.
Yeah, there's no substantive difference. One is a substitute for the other. So anyway, but again, it's up to council's wishes. Councillor Paul.
I'd just like to ask I guess this would be a procedural question for staff, and that is, would it be appropriate to make a motion to adopt the bylaw subject to changing the word where it appears, power, to authority, and let staff make those changes? It's still going to come back for final adoption.
Go ahead, Director Turner.
Thank you. We could do that, or we could seek opinion whether it's necessary. We could also put a definition there. Power means authority. So I mean, it's kind of a little bit circular.
Sometimes councils get into stuff that just let's get the business done, right? This is a long overdue cleaning up of a substantive bylaw that will give efficiencies to get housing and other things built in this community. And so why waste time, staff time, et cetera? So anyway, that's my 2 bits worth. Let's get on with it. Director Turner.
And probably an even bigger point is this is not a bylaw that every person is going to read. This is a bylaw really meant for engineers and technologists anyway, so.
Okay, I'm not willing to waste any more time on this conversation. Pending no motion of deferral, we will then vote on this bylaw at the bylaw readings, okay? So thank you for that. If there's no further questions actually on the substance and intent of the bylaw, we'll move on, okay? Next, West Quesnel land stability.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to discuss the next steps that are recommended for the West Quesnel Land Stability Initiative. The other purpose is to consider public engagement on this important issue, which of course has been a very top priority issue for Council for quite a number of years. So by way of summary, the West Quesnel Land Stability is being a very long-term capital-intensive program. The last estimate I saw that looked like we'd spent over $17 million invested in this, and that is our own source funds, provincial funds, and federal funds. So engineering, $17 million invested in engineering studies of the land slippage problem and the dewatering infrastructure. That was the supposed solution to these problems. Throughout this process, it was confirmed that there is a large, slow-moving landslide underlying a section of West Cornell. Phase 1 and 2 of the dewatering program saw the installation of 23 pumping wells, 13 horizontal fan drains, stormwater infrastructure, and related infrastructure and ground movement monitoring systems. Until the year 2020, it looked like this was working very well for us. There was, if you looked at the graphs of the actual land movements, very significantly decreased, substantially reduced due, we feel, in the engineers feel, to reduced groundwater pressure. This may still very well be the case, but the 2020 movement was a very high level movement of 84 millimeters. Now, that's not to say that we can't speculate what that movement would have been if that drainage infrastructure hadn't been installed. So maybe it would have been much more. But we know that 84 millimeters is a very high amount of movement, and that's at a representative measuring point. That 84 millimeters compares to an average of 13 millimeters between 2013 and 2019. So it gives you a scale of difference there. The 84 is huge. So next steps on this file. So from the capital perspective, the staff recommendation is that we will continue with our program of closely monitoring the actual land movement. This monitoring requires a city to continue to invest in monitoring equipment which is damaged or destroyed due to land movement. In fact, in 2022, our budget contains $65,000 to replace damaged monitoring equipment. The existing dewatering infrastructure, so the wells, the fans, that and all the related infrastructure connecting that to the drainage, that must be maintained. In 2021, 2 horizontal fans were rehabbed, and early indications suggest that this was successful. And early indications means that they started flowing more water after the rehabbing of those horizontal fans. The current estimate to maintain the existing equipment requires an annual contribution of $70,000, which is built into our operating budget. The engineers on this area do not suggest that more subsurface drainage would have a significant effect on land movement. So what that means is, when specifically asked, are there areas within that study area which are, crying out for another pumping well or more horizontal fans? And they can't pinpoint an area and say, look, there's a sweet spot there where a few more wells in there would have a substantial impact. That's not to say that more infrastructure wouldn't be useful, but what it does say is that there's no, I guess, no immediate targets for installing it, because it's a pretty well-drained area now. Other ideas discussed by our engineers as far as future improvements, such as draining ponds, and there's a number of ponds up there, are not feasible to the extremely high cost and the fact that those ponds are on private land. So it's a whole different level of difficulty in trying to access those because they're on private lands. So the city will continue to focus on the surface drainage in this area. A new storm sewer main line is planned for Avison Street in 2022 at a cost of $640,000. And a major rebuild of the roads and storm sewer for Patches Street is planned for 2023 at a cost of $950,000. Funding from that is allocated from regular capital funds. So, funding for future capital works. If the drainage efforts were to be expanded in the future, and that is, and by that I mean the subsurface drainage, through drilling more pumping wells or horizontal drain fans, it's reasonable to expect that the benefiting residents would pay for part of that cost through a local service area parcel tax. Previously, our large investments also had large grant funding from higher levels of government, and whether that is a continuation or is no way of knowing. Staff recommends the consideration of a parcel tax to benefiting properties as part of the funding mechanism for any expanded capital works in the future, designed to mitigate the land movement. So it's an interesting question there, because we've talked and we've gone around that question a number of times in the last 5 to 10 years. It's almost impossible, and I would say it is impossible, to try to institute a parcel tax for works that we've already done, because what if people say no? Well, you've already spent the money, right? So, but in the future, if we were to look at a package of, we want to improve the drainage in this area, here's what that package looks like, it would be reasonable at that point in time to say, well, we would hope that the residents in that area should pay for X amount of that. And that's actually consistent with how our policy on local service works. We do have a policy which states that, and it applies to a number of areas where there's requests for local service. We look to the residents to pay for a share of that. And then council, if that was the case, would need to determine the level of municipal assist on that project, depending on what the impact is on our own infrastructure. That whole discussion is a bit academic at this point in time. We're not asking for a parcel tax for anything that we've already spent the money on, and we don't anticipate, there's no plans right now for new subsurface drainage. So it's a bit of a theoretical question about, is it fair that they pay their share? I think in the future, though, if we get to that point, it would be something to investigate further. So construction in the study area, as council knows, we've done a lot of work around trying to figure out what type of construction should still be able to occur in that study area. Regulations were modified to facilitate homeowners being able to maintain their dwellings. It used to be more restrictive with rules about what percentage of assessed value could be spent on the property. That's been relaxed because it's to the benefit of everyone if the homeowners can maintain their dwellings properly. In addition, mobile homes are now allowed on properties that could not accommodate single-family dwellings due to movement concerns. The building inspector still maintains the right to require a geotechnical report certifying the safety of a property for its intended use for all developments as he deems necessary. And that's the same power he has throughout the whole city. That's one of the standard powers of the building inspector, to make sure that the land is safe for the intended use. De-densification development practices are also encouraged in the study area. And council will recall we've had some where we sold lots of land to adjoining properties with the stipulation that it's not to be built on. So that's de-densification. It's taking a lot out of the land of the buildable land inventory. So that's encouraged in that study area to reduce the overall development in there. Due to the size of the landslide under the West Quesnel study area and the inability of city drainage programs to actually stop movement, even when it was most effective, it didn't stop the movement, slowed it down substantially, but didn't stop it. Due to those factors, council and property owners should expect that building regulations will always be more stringent in the study area than other more stable areas. That's the fact of life moving forward. Building, we eased it to where we can, but we need to still maintain a higher level of regulation to ensure it's safe for the future, and also to reduce the liability of approving developments. If there's a future problem with those developments and council has done that approval, we accrue some liability. So public engagement moving forward. We've had some discussion at our communications meeting on how we engage with this. We feel that we need to, it's appropriate and the time is probably due that we would have a public meeting to inform residents of the land movement and answer any questions they may have. Obviously, we still have COVID concerns, so I think we probably want to wait till after more of the restrictions have eased. But in the interim, we'd like to do a newsletter to residents in the study area outlining the issues. And one note, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but when we did receive the report from our engineers in the fall of 2021 outlining a very high rate of land movement, we brought that right away to an open council meeting, just so we weren't hoarding the information or trying to embargo it until we looked at it further. We brought it out because we think it's important information for the public to have. Other engagement issues. I'm trying to think of the timing, but it was probably 5 to 7 years ago. We actually had some water ambassadors who the city hired, and they were summer student types, and they went around particularly in the study area, and encouraging residents to make sure they're diverting as much water as possible from entering into the groundwater. Having lots of discussion about rain and snow melt and how that gets directed into storm sewers. We also had discussions about whether we should get into potentially encourage more types of xeriscaping or other type of formats where there's less water put into the grounds. Those positive steps, that was good information back then, and it's still good information now. And I think we need to think about, from a city perspective, how we keep putting that word out there, because it's great information, and every bit of water we remove from sinking into the ground has a potential positive benefit. One of the interesting issues that we're seeing currently is that for 2022, property tax assessments, the land component of them in the study area have gone up quite a bit. And I think that's a reflection of two things. First, it's at its base level, a reflection of the market value. And the market value, because those properties are selling, because now there are uses. You can put mobile homes on those properties, and there's a wider spectrum of uses for those property. And then the values in general in Cornell have gone up substantially. So those lot values have increased for the empty lots and for the lot component, the land component of general assessments. So while increasing values are generally good news for property owners, if that property owner happens to own a piece of land which is undevelopable due to significant slippage, that's probably not going to be the best news that the assessed values have gone up and their taxation will go up. There may be some fallback on that as far as ability or desire to pay taxes on that property. It remains to be seen, but it is a potential issue, right? This report is a bit of a lot of different issues all coming together in it, kind of wrapping up this issue for us. But provincial investment in mitigation measures. As mentioned before, total spending on this file has exceeded $17 million. And the province has been, as well as the federal government, have been active partners in helping to fund that work. And it's not just one grant, it's been a number of grants where they've been active partners. Over the years, there's also been talk of potential funding to help reimburse homeowners for damage to their homes. Or in some cases, some homes actually were torn down due to the excessive amount of damages and the unsafety of those homes. There's also been discussion of asking the province to help provide funding under an emergency program. So that question was specifically put to the folks at Emergency Management BC. I asked them particularly this year to do in the fall of 2021, to do a search of existing provincial programs to see if there was any funding that they could find that would fit and would apply to this situation. And they found that they couldn't find any funding sources. So I know there's been some discussion out in the community about, we'll find funding, we'll help you out with this. I think the answer at this point in time is it does not look like there's any type of funding availability to help homeowners. The long-term nature of this movement doesn't fit with the disaster financial assistance, which disaster financial assistance is all about emergency situations and something happening, and it has to be declared a disaster by the provincial government. In this case, this is a long, slow-moving file, and it does not fit the criteria for the disaster financial assistance funding. And the conclusion that I was told to put in here from a senior provincial representative who talked to even more senior provincial folks, there's no funding available. So I think it's important at some point in time that word is out there, and that's the word we've seen. Having said that, the province, of course, has control to make funding if they chose to. I would suggest with the amount of funding requests pertaining to emergencies, this for the province right now, this might be a fairly low priority. So I think I could summarize this. Sorry for going through the report. I do love reading my reports verbatim. But so to summarize this, the city will continue to monitor movement. We'll maintain the monitoring equipment so we can understand what that movement is. We'll maintain installed infrastructure. But there's no new capital subsurface drainage program in the works right now or being planned. And residents can expect heightened building restrictions to remain in place for the foreseeable future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, City Manager. And to all of the other directors here, do not follow this role model in this particular case. The City Manager, you're getting some notoriety for verbatim readings of reports. Anyway, it is a very important file. We are bringing it to a close. I think for the general public, it's important that they do get these details. I think from a council perspective, in particular for council members who weren't there one term ago, we made it explicit to the folks over in West Quesnel that we needed some time with the data that we were collecting, with the drainage system that was being installed, to figure out whether or not we were getting any purchase in this very expensive science experiment. I think the answer is maybe, and not a lot. And so I think it is bringing to closure some of these things. And I think in addition to what the city manager is indicating, what we're basically saying to those folks over there, don't expect another big wave of capital investment. If there is going to be another big wave of capital investment, we're coming knocking on your door for a contribution to that, which should have, quite frankly, been done at the very beginning of all of this. And we're closing the book on a promise that previous councils have made that somehow there's going to be redress for individual homeowners who have seen their homes pulled apart by this. And the answer to that is there won't be. They're on their own for that. So I want to just one piece of clarification to Director Bolton, because you've engaged BC Assessment on this. We have provided documentation of where we're actually at to BC Assessment on this file.
Yeah, I provided the documentation that Director of Development Services has made about West Quesnel land stability, so they have all the background information.
Yeah, so just as a counterpoint to market forces there, but from a public perspective and with respect to any reporting on this, any landowner that is seeing a bump on land that they don't believe is developable should get into the appeal process right away. They've got a case that can be supported by documentation that we provide to make a pretty substantive appeal to BC Assessment. So, okay, on that, Councillor Runge.
Yes, thank you. And you actually spoke to that dedensification portion with the lot value also, but in paragraph 342 of your report there, just kidding, just kidding. When that newsletter comes out, given the weirdness of our fine coronavirus that seems to be hanging around for way longer than we expected, might I suggest also that we have, like, you have a meeting date set sometime, let's say in June, but if that meeting date were to be superseded by outside forces, that we plan a Zoom meeting? Because I'm just thinking, if I were a homeowner with a newsletter, that'd be a perfect place to put it in. Here's my meeting date. If something happens, we'll have a Zoom meeting date on that day. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, and I think we're learning from the regional district and others that have continued to have some public hearings because they're required to, and there's occupancy requirements. In the past, we've met over at the school at Voyageur, and so it may mean multiple meetings in order to meet occupancy requirements and RSVP, things like that. So an in-person, I think, would be preferred, and if we have to hold multiple meetings over the course of a week in order to meet occupancy requirements, I think we'll just have to eat that and figure that out. So, but the point is taken. I do think that we should try to have that meeting with the public sooner than later, despite the COVID restrictions. Okay.
And the suggestion was just to put that meeting right into the newsletter so we have one mail out.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions or comments on this? Councillor Paul?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting when we're talking about assessment, and one would think that this news would actually drive assessed values down somewhat. In fact, I did a comparison today. I've got a house over on Allard Street, and the assessment went up 35%, and our home on Moffat Avenue in Johnson Sub went up by 22%, and I'm kind of thinking that to my way of thinking, it should be the other way around. But I agree that you know that the people within the study area should be paying very close attention to this discussion, and if they feel so inclined, they've basically got 2 weeks to get an appeal in.
Yep. Okay. Other questions or comments on this report? Okay, so we will proceed and to engage the public and inform the public about this very important issue. Okay, seeing no further questions or comments, we'll move on to the next report. So Director Turner on the variance.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This report is about a development variance for 3481 Gook Road for changes to the accessory building numbers and structures regulations. The variance is to vary the maximum number of accessory buildings permitted in a CR2 zone and to vary the front line setback for one of those buildings. The property owner is requesting a variance to site 2 additional accessory buildings on his property, which do not meet zoning requirements for those reasons. The CR2 zone permits 2 accessory structures, and the applicant, again, is requesting 4. One of the accessory buildings of the 2 that are being requested will not meet the setback of 4.6 meters from the front lot line, or is requested to meet, to be just 4.6 meters from the front lot line. There are no objections to these requested variances, and probably for the most part because these buildings are all screened from the road via significant landscaping, so there's not an impact to the surrounding neighbors. The application process did go out for notices and referrals. We've had no questions from the public or comments from the public on the request. There was no concerns brought up by any of the referral agencies either. For that reason, it's recommended that council vary the following sections of zoning bylaw number 1880, 2019 on lot 1, district lot 6677, Caribou Plan District 21384, except plans 33359 and PGP 37449, 3481 Gook Road, to vary section 48.2 to permit a total of 4 accessory buildings on the property, and section 4810 to permit a front lot setback of 4.6 meters.
Councillor Runge, so moved. Councillor Elliott, second. Questions or comments? Seeing none on the motion, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passed unanimously. Okay. Next, Director Bolton on FTEs.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to review the recommended employee additions for budget 2022. The reason we're bringing this forward ahead of the operating budget, it was felt that some of these positions we need to get in place right away, so we wanted to make sure we brought this to the council as soon as we could. So the following positions have been reviewed and are recommended by the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee. These positions ensure the sustainability of our services and also enable us to be more proactive in our capital program to be able to continue to seek out capital grants for the city. So I have included a description description of each of the positions below that you can take, that I'm sure you've read. So then the recommendation is that council approves the addition of the following positions in the 2022 operating budget. Building maintenance worker, 1 full-time equivalent, it's beginning in July. During the summer, student engineering tech into a full-time position, a capital works supervisor, and 2 utility laborers. And in addition to that, the council approved the addition of 3 pickup trucks to the 2022 capital budget for the additional employees that will be funded from the equipment reserve. And again, these are new vehicles, that's why it's coming to council.
So Councillor Elliott so moves. Councillor Rudenberg second. Questions or comments? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Regrettably, I cannot support this recommendation without first seeing what the implications are of the rest of the operating budget. I've seen this before where operating items are pushed through ahead of discussion and consideration of the remainder of the budget. And so I will be voting against this resolution, even though I'm not necessarily opposed to the hiring of these positions, but I want to see how this all fits in with the total operating budget.
And again, that's an old way of doing business where the number of what the tax lift is important as opposed to the functions being made whole. So I would be crystal clear with council. We have added and continue to add more buildings to the city's assets, and those buildings need to be maintained, and so therefore increasing our building maintenance capacity to 1 FTE is a standalone argument, independent of the overall budget. The engineering tech is an adjunct to council advancing a lot of capital projects, and a lot of those capital projects being associated with council initiatives and the grant funding that we're bringing in. We have a number of pretty substantive grants that we have to deploy as capital projects, and we need to give support on that. And then the capital works supervisor is of a similar kind, and the reorganization council's already approved of capital and public works, and the utility laborers is a function of the fact that we have a lot of work out there and we're burning out our current crews. So in this report is our justification for each of those positions, and the old style of council saying, okay, what's the number? You know, what's the number? Can, you know, and then I don't like that number. Can you change the number? Is not how any business should actually do their business. So this is not a conspiracy theory. It's not a way of sneaking stuff under the wire. It's actually a way to do business better and to be much more transparent with the public about the logic behind different aspects of our operating budget. You will also note, Councillor Paul, that a large component of this funding does not have anything to do with our operating budget. It's coming from capital reserves, or it's coming from utilities funding. So only a portion of it impacts the operating budget. Councillor Runge, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just have a question, and it's with regards to the student summer intern, the engineering tech. Was that also funded by a different source, like Student Summer Works or something like that? Do we have access to Student Summer Works as just add-ons? Because I don't want to speak against the positions, because I did have a meeting with Director Thomas there last week with regards to snow removal, and I think everybody in the town knows how much work it has been in the last month, and it just seems to just keep coming down. So, you know, I don't want to argue the spots, but I'm just wondering if there's a way to get more, you know, for Student Summer Works funded by some other places.
Yeah, so this particular position was not funded by the student grant program, but we do have quite a few positions that are at the museum, at the Art and Rec Center, at our public works laborers. We do get quite a bit from those grant programs.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so on the recommendation, sorry, remind me, we've got a mover and seconder, correct? Yes, that's what I thought. On the recommendation, all in favor? Any opposed?
And I'd like that recorded, please.
Okay, Councillor Paul, record it. Okay, next, we move on to zoning amendment bylaw. Director Turner.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just note this is a little bit more complex of a report, so there will be a little bit more lengthy, but I'll try and keep it as concise as possible. I'm going to move right into the back.
Why don't you just read it?
Because my boss gets mad at me. Yeah, the applicant, Consta Holdings Limited, is proposing to rezone Lot B along Gook Road from residential reserve, RR1, to country residential. The applicant is in the process of subdividing the undeveloped parcels into 9 fee-simple lots for future development. They'll be sold as developable lots at that time. They will be serviced with Red Bluff sewer, but they will require water wells. The additional to this report that was I recognize was left out is that because this is a complicated report and there is a subdivision application, I just want to note that there was a domestic proof of water assessment capacity. There is appropriate water for all of these lots without drawing down other water wells. But I will note there will be a requirement to do a covenant on there that will require some treatment of those lots, which is all standard practice now, that that stuff be identified beforehand and be put on as a covenant on the lots. In addition, so the OC, in terms of the zoning or the official community plan, this was already designated single density or single dwelling residential in our OCP. The zoning still has to be updated, and we are recommending we go to CR1, not RS1. The reason for that is because of the lack of services. The CR1 zone does specify certain lot sizes for lack of water service. So that's why it's going to that zone. There was a sensitive ecosystem environmental assessment that was prepared. This meets the requirements, so we do not have to do a full development permit review. There was conditions that were applied in that environmental assessment that will be employed at the subdivision time, again through covenants, et cetera, to make sure that all of the conditions that are recommended by the environmental professional be adhered to. The Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure through legislation does require the provision of a right-of-way. Though we have had discussions, access to water. You know, along waterways, there's a number of right-of-ways that go down and access water. That's required by legislation to be provided at certain distances. This does not meet the requirement, and so they ought to provide an access to water. There's no logical place to put it in this development or in that area. We have worked with the Ministry of Transportation to have them agree during the subdivision process that we will just add on to the existing access to water that's on the would be on the east side of their lot, and that we will just widen that by 5 meters instead of providing another addition. This is a power that the approving officer with the ministry is able to approve. So that's what we'll be doing in that case. Should this go to further? Those are some of the main components of the development. The recommendation here is that council considers first and second readings of the zoning amendment bylaw to rezone Lot B, District Lot 667 or 677, Caribou District Plan 33809 from RR1 to CR1 to permit the 9-lot subdivision, and that council set a public hearing date under the bylaw section of the agenda for 6 p.m. Tuesday, March 1st, 2022 at City Hall Chambers with notice of public hearing to contain details of in-person and/or electronic attendance for the public pending direction from any legislative and/or public health orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Director Turner. Councillor Paul, so moved? Okay. Councillor Paul moved. Seconder, Councillor Rinberg. Okay. Questions or comments? Councillor Runge.
Thank you. So this is, I think, the first time that we've ever had that Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure the paragraph, the first paragraph there with the high potential to contain archaeological sites. So as it's subdivided, would that be done prior to those lots being sold, or would the person purchasing the lot then have to do that?
That's a requirement that we notify the applicant for. We do not require any information from them on it. So we work with them to do their part. That's the way the legislation and requirements stand right now. There's a lot of moving parts and changing with how different agencies are working with the archaeology branch and working with in terms of requiring, but they're basically just notifying us that there are requirements, as we do with different proponents of that are in archaeologically significant areas.
Yeah, but I guess the question is the developer will just price that into whatever they do in terms of lot sale or whatever the case may be, right? That we don't get involved in that business.
Correct, sir. Yeah.
Yes, my question is more that, if we subdivided, would we then be held to some sort of a standard on that? Okay, thank you.
Okay. It's just a cost of doing business now, and we're not part of that. So we incur the cost. Like if it's ours, so we're times where we incur the cost if we're the developer of record or if we're doing something on city property, but not on private property. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so on the recommendation and motions on the floor, all those in favor? Any opposed? That carried unanimously. Okay, council information package. Just a reminder vis-a-vis councillors Paul's email today. So feel free to poll and give staff advance notice of polling, but don't start a conversation about the thing you want polled out of the council information package. So you can pull one at any time, just with advance notice to Ms. Hartley. Bylaws, development service, first, second, and third reading with the addition of the word "and" in the clause that we pointed it out on. So motion to that effect. Councillor Elliott, so moved. Councillor Vic. Okay. Any further comments? All in favor? Any opposed? The motion carried unanimously. Bylaw 1917, the zoning amendment bylaw for Gook, the one that we just discussed, first and second readings, and setting the public hearing date for 6 p.m. Tuesday, March 1st, with due notification. Councillor Rudenberg, so moved. Councillor Runge, second. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Changes to upcoming meeting schedule. You'll see a notice today that we want to use the January 25th Tuesday evening time slot for a strategic planning session. With that strategic planning session, you'll get advance notice, but I would like to flag for council that you should go back in and take a look at our economic development strategy, and in particular our transition strategy, because the substance of our discussion in strategic planning will be around that change from trying to stimulate growth to managing growth and the implications for reallocating resources to that. And then it looks like we may need an in-camera, so just a bit of an advance notice in advance of the February 1st meeting for those of you who have work schedules, because we would probably try and have it at 5 p.m. So that's just a bit of a heads up. We'll confirm that closer to the date, but right now we're talking about a couple of in-camera items. No changes to committee appointments, announcement, future events. Councillor Rudenberg.
Thank you. So really nice to see everybody again, and thank you for that mic drop moment, Director Bolton. That was great. As we all know, COVID has really put a real stop on community groups doing fundraising, et cetera. But just wanted to let people know that the Palliative Care Group, the Hospice Palliative Care Association, they are going to be trying an online dessert auction. It will be starting February 1st through the 12th. Every day there will be a new cake or dessert put online for a bid. And pay attention, because I will be putting a red velvet scrumptious cake out there for bidding. So I just wanted to let everybody know that that's happening. Thanks.
Great. Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got some sad news, and I'm sure that most of council is already aware of the fact that yesterday Mrs. Lynn Tingley passed away at the young age of 102. And Lynn was the widow of Seal Tingley, who was our mayor from 1970 to 76. So I think on behalf of council, our condolences to the Tingley family.
Thank you, Councillor Paul, for making us aware of that. Any other announcements of future events? Seeing none, any gallery questions? Seeing none, I would invite a motion to adjourn. Councillor Paul so moved, Councillor Elliott second. Any further questions or comments? All in favor? And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everybody. That was a lot of work done tonight. Very much appreciated.